My son brought his wife home for Sunday dinner, and she made me tea. It tasted wrong. 20 minutes later, I was on the kitchen floor, and I understood exactly what was happening to me. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from today. I had spent 34 years building a plumbing contracting business in Kelowna, British Columbia. Not a glamorous industry, but an honest one. My hands still carry the calluses from the early years when I was the one crawling under houses in February, working through frozen pipes and flooded basements while my wife, Margaret, kept the books and raised our son, Thomas. By the time I was 63, the company had 12 employees, a solid reputation across the Okanagan, and a house on the lakeshore that I'd paid off completely. Margaret passed from cancer 6 years ago. The house became quieter after that. But it was still mine, still full of her presence in the garden she'd planted, and the curtains she'd chosen, and the way the light came through the kitchen window on winter mornings. Thomas was 41. He worked in commercial real estate sales in Vancouver, which sounded impressive until you understood that his income had been irregular for the past 3 years, lurching between good quarters and terrible ones. His wife, my daughter-in-law, was named Renata. She was 38, attractive in a deliberate way, the kind of woman who was always calculating her position in a room. I had tried to like her when Thomas first brought her home 7 years ago. I tried harder after they married. I never entirely succeeded, though I kept that to myself out of respect for my son. They had moved into my Kelowna house 8 months before everything happened. The explanation was reasonable on its surface. Thomas had lost a major commercial listing. Their Vancouver condo lease was up, and they needed time to stabilize. I said yes because Thomas was my only child and Margaret would have said yes. And because the house had 4 bedrooms and I rattled around in it alone. What I did not fully account for was Renata's relationship with space she did not own. Within 3 weeks of arriving, she had reorganized my kitchen, replaced the bath towels Margaret had chosen, and begun referring to the master bedroom as our room in conversations with people I'd never met. Thomas watched all of this and said nothing. I watched Thomas watching and said nothing either. And that silence was my first mistake. The conversation that broke everything open happened on a Friday evening in October. I was at my desk reviewing the quarterly accounts my accountant had sent over when Thomas knocked and came in without waiting. Renata was behind him. She was carrying a folder, which I recognized as my own filing folder from the cabinet in the hallway. Something cold moved through me immediately. Thomas sat down across from me with the particular expression of a man who has rehearsed something. "Dad, we've been talking, and we think it's time to look seriously at a transition plan for the business. I keep the books, so I've done some preliminary numbers," Renata said, placing the folder on my desk. She had opened it to pages I had never given her permission to see. Her finger moved across columns of revenue figures. "If you restructured the ownership now, there are significant tax advantages under the lifetime capital gains exemption. You could transfer the business to Thomas before year-end and the house at the same time. And we're talking about saving potentially $400,000 in future estate costs." I looked at my son. He was nodding at the desk. I picked up the folder and closed it. "You went through my private files." Renata did not flinch. "We live here too. We were trying to help you." That folder was in a locked cabinet. Thomas looked at the window. The key was on the hook. "We assumed you wouldn't mind." I stood up slowly. "This business took me 34 years to build. This house belonged to your mother before it belonged to either of us. I will decide what happens to both of them, and I will decide on my own timeline. Please leave my office." Thomas stood. He looked like he wanted to say something else, something gentler. But Renata's hand touched his arm, and they left together. I sat back down and looked at the closed folder on my desk for a long time. I could hear them talking in the kitchen, voices low and close. The particular intimacy of 2 people agreeing on something. I barely slept that night. I lay in the dark and replayed the conversation and thought about Margaret, and thought about how she had always read people faster than I did. She would have seen Renata clearly from the beginning. She would have done something about it years earlier, with grace and firmness in the way she did everything. The next morning, I heard Thomas's footsteps in the hallway. before I saw his face appear in the doorway. He looked tired and genuinely sorry, which made me want to believe what came next. "Dad, I owe you an apology. Last night was wrong. The way we approached it was wrong. I know that." I sat up. "I appreciate you saying that." He came into the room and sat on the edge of the chair near the window. The same chair Margaret used to read in. "We're just worried about you. You're 63. You're running the business alone, and we want to make sure everything is protected. For you, I mean." We talked for 20 minutes. By the end, it felt like something had been repaired, the way wood swells after getting wet, and the joints tighten again. He left the room, and I heard him say something to Renata in the hallway, too quiet to make out. And a few minutes later, she appeared in my doorway holding a mug with both hands. "I made you tea," she said. "Peace offering." She smiled, and the smile was warm enough that I accepted it. I carried the mug to the living room and opened the newspaper. The tea tasted different than mine, slightly bitter under the honey, but I assumed she'd used a different blend. I drank most of it. 18 minutes later, the newspaper became impossible to focus on. The words separated from their meanings. I stood up to get water, and the floor came at me wrong, tilted sideways, and I grabbed the side table and knocked a lamp to the floor. My legs were filled with something heavy and slow. My vision was narrowing from the edges inward. I sat down hard on the carpet because standing was no longer an option. The phone was across the room. I focused on it like it was the only fixed point in a turning world. I got there on my hands and knees. My fingers were clumsy and fat, and it took 3 attempts to unlock the screen. 911. "What's your emergency?" "I've been poisoned." "I think I've been poisoned. I need an ambulance." "I'm at 44, 18 Lakeshore Road, in Kelowna." "Sir, stay with me." "Can you stay on the line?" "I don't know how long." Something in my tea. I set the phone down on the carpet with the call still connected because I couldn't hold it anymore. I lay on my side and watched the baseboards go fuzzy and thought very clearly, before the darkness pulled me under, that I should have listened to Margaret. I woke up to ceiling tiles and the smell of antiseptic and a blood pressure cuff inflating on my left arm. A nurse noticed me opening my eyes and leaned into my field of vision. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Diane. You're at Kelowna General Hospital. You came in by ambulance last night. Can you tell me your full name?" "William Harrington." "Good. Good." She made a note. "The doctor will be in shortly." The doctor was a compact, serious man named Dr. Arsenault who pulled his chair close to the bed before he started talking, which told me before he said anything that the news required proximity. "Mr. Harrington, your blood work came back from the lab, and I want to be direct with you. We found elevated levels of zopiclone, which is a sleep medication, combined with diphenhydramine in concentrations significantly above therapeutic range. In a man your age, with your blood pressure history, this combination can cause respiratory depression. It can be fatal." He paused. "This was not an accidental exposure. Someone put these in something you consumed." I stared at the ceiling for several seconds. "You need to tell me if you know who might have done this." I was quiet for a long time. He waited without rushing me, which I appreciated. "Can you give me until tomorrow morning?" I said finally. "I need to think clearly before I say anything. I need to be certain." He nodded slowly. "I'm going to document everything I've told you. The time, the results, this conversation. There are reporting obligations here that I need to flag with you honestly, but I'll give you until morning." After he left, I lay still and methodical thoughts came, cold and orderly. The tea. Renata making it without being asked, standing in my doorway with that careful smile, Thomas's apology setting up the moment. The way she had held the mug with both hands like something precious. I thought about the folder she had taken from my locked cabinet. I thought about what I was worth, the business, the house, the investments Margaret and I had accumulated over a life of careful work. I thought about the capital gains exemption she had mentioned so specifically, so technically, as though she had researched it. Thomas came that afternoon. He came alone, which I noted. He sat at my bedside and held my hand and cried, real tears. And I let him cry, and I performed confusion and exhaustion perfectly. The doctors think it was a medication reaction. Maybe my blood pressure pills, I told him. Thomas exhaled in a way that lasted too long to be purely relief. He asked careful questions about what the doctors had found, and I gave vague answers and watched his face. Renata appeared in the doorway behind him. She stood there in a coat I hadn't seen before, expensive looking, and made sounds of concern. I watched her eyes. They moved to the monitor readings on the wall and back to my face, checking something, evaluating something, and then settled into performed worry. When they left, I opened my notes application and typed, Thomas exhale reaction when I said medication, not poison. Renata checked monitors before expressing concern. Neither asked to stay the night. That evening, I called my accountant, Gerald. I told him I was in hospital after a health incident and needed the name of a good estate lawyer immediately. Someone sharp. Someone who litigated. He gave me 3 names. I researched them from my hospital bed until 2 in the morning. Patricia Ng at Ng and Associates in Kelowna had 22 years of practice and a specific background in contested estate matters. I called her office when they opened and had an appointment set for the day after discharge. Patricia Ng was 61, precise, and she listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, she uncapped her pen and started writing. Mr. Harrington, what you're describing is attempted murder. I understand. You haven't filed a report yet. That's your choice to make, but I want to be clear that the evidence will become more important the longer you wait. What I can do right now is help you ensure that whatever happens next, they gain nothing from it. I want to start there, I said. Before anything else, I want to close the door on what they're actually after. She outlined everything clearly. Under British Columbia law, you have complete testamentary freedom. You can leave your estate to whoever you choose. Your son has no legal entitlement to the business or the house while you're alive. She slid a business card across the desk. Raymond Chow. Former RCMP, now independent. Best investigator I know for financial background work. If there's a pattern here beyond last Saturday morning, he'll find it. Raymond Chow worked out of a plain office on the 2nd floor of a building near the airport. He had the unhurried manner of someone who had learned patience the hard way. You think your son and daughter-in-law tried to kill you for inheritance. Tell me what makes you certain rather than suspicious. I told him about the folder, about the capital gains briefing, about the timeline of their financial troubles, about Renata's eyes moving to the monitors before she expressed concern. He didn't blink. I'll need their full names and dates of birth. Thomas Douglas Harrington. Renata Harrington, née Kozak. I gave him what he needed. 3 days after I came home from hospital, I called a security company. Thomas and Renata were both out when the technician arrived. He was young and efficient and explained the camera placement clearly. Main floor common areas only. Living room, kitchen, hallway, dining room. All legal for property owners in BC. I tested the feeds on my phone until the image quality satisfied me. I moved through the next 2 weeks performing recovery. I let my movements stay slightly slow, my memory slightly approximate, my energy visibly limited. Renata brought me meals on a small tray with a napkin folded under the fork. I thanked her each time and watched her watch me eat. Thomas came home earlier than usual most evenings and sat with me and talked carefully about nothing. I played my part and recorded everything. Raymond's call came on a Thursday morning. William, I have the picture. It's worse than you probably expected. How much? Thomas carries $114,000 in outstanding business loans from 2 failed venture attempts over the past 4 years. Credit card balances across 4 accounts total $63,000. Renata has $38,000 in personal debt. They have a private loan from an individual lender in Vancouver, $40,000 at 14% interest. Their combined monthly debt service exceeds their combined income by approximately $3,500. I wrote down every number. Send me everything. They're not making minimum payments on 3 accounts. 1 card has gone to collections. They have no assets. Their Vancouver condo was rented, not owned. I understood everything then, the entire architecture of it. They hadn't come to Kelowna to stabilize. They had come to Kelowna because Kelowna was where the solution was. I was the solution. The business, worth approximately $1.5 million if sold. The house, assessed at $900,000 on the lake. The investments, alive. I was a problem because I had the authority to say no, and I did say no. Dead. I became the answer to every number Raymond had just read to me. I sat at my desk in the room where they had laid out their folder of my private financials, and I felt something settle in my chest like cold iron. Not grief. Not yet. Something more functional. Resolve. That evening after dinner, I left a document on the kitchen counter. The letter from Patricia Ning's office was on top, her firm letterhead visible. I had positioned it partly under a stack of mail. Not hidden. Not prominent. Then I went upstairs. I watched the kitchen feed on my phone 40 minutes later when I heard Renata come down for water. She saw the letterhead before she saw anything else. She stopped. Her hand hovered. She checked the hallway. Then she picked up the document and read. Her knees buckled. She caught the counter with both hands. She stood there for 60 seconds without moving, reading it a second time. Then she dialed. What I saw next through the feed confirmed everything Raymond had told me and everything I already knew. 2 days later, Thomas knocked on my office door in the evening. He was trying to look calm, and he was not calm. Dad. Renata found some paperwork on the counter. A document from a lawyer. There must be some mistake about what it says. No mistake. That's my updated will, properly executed. He went very still. You disinherited me completely. I changed my will after someone put zopiclone and diphenhydramine in my tea. I looked at him steadily. The toxicology report was specific. Thomas's jaw moved without producing words for a moment. That was a reaction to your medication. The doctors said it might have been your blood pressure pills interacting with something you ate. The doctors said nothing of the kind. I said it to you in the hospital because I needed time to think. The actual results say otherwise. Renata appeared in the doorway behind him. Her face had gone the particular color of someone whose plan has failed at a point they cannot recover from. Thomas tried logic. The will won't hold up. You were on medication, recovering from a serious health event. Any lawyer could argue you weren't competent when you signed it. I signed it with 2 independent witnesses, a notary, and a complete psychiatric evaluation on file, I told him. That evaluation was performed by Dr. Sandhu at the Kelowna clinic last week. I anticipated that argument. Please tell Renata I anticipated that argument. Renata stepped fully into the room then. Her voice was controlled, but her hands were not. William, we have over $200,000 in debt. Without this inheritance, we will lose everything. Everything. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked at my son. I told them what they had tried to do and what it had cost. And I told them that I wanted them out of my house. Thomas said they would contest the will. He said he'd find doctors who would testify I was delusional. He said he'd make the process miserable enough that I'd give in. Renata was already on her phone in the hallway before he finished talking. That night I listened to their voices through the surveillance feed until 2 in the morning. Fragments. If he has the tox report, it's over. What if he's already talked to the police? He can't prove I made the tea. He has no camera in the kitchen. He has no camera in the kitchen. I listened to that particular reassurance 3 times and felt something I recognized as the precise opposite of comfort. I called Patricia the next morning. She filed the demand that afternoon. Market rent for a lakefront property in Kelowna. $3,200 per month. Due within 10 days or legal proceedings would commence. Thomas called that evening. You're really going to evict your own son? I was nearly killed in my own house. Eviction is modest by comparison. Raymond called me 4 days after the demand letter was delivered. I've been tracking your daughter-in-law's internet history through her public accounts and some other signals I can discuss in person. In the week before your hospitalization, she conducted 8 specific searches. Zopiclone maximum dose by weight. Sleep medication overdose elderly. Antihistamine combination risk. Time to effect oral sedatives. He paused. There's a pattern here that a prosecutor would find straightforward. I asked him to document everything and send it to Patricia. Patricia in turn reached out to a contact at the RCMP Kelowna detachment. Her contact was a sergeant named Delorme, who worked family violence and elder abuse files, and had a reputation for building airtight cases before moving. Patricia sent him the medical records, the toxicology results, Raymond's financial investigation, and the surveillance footage from my house. She did not send the search history yet. She told me we should let them talk more first. The British Columbia Tenancy Branch ruled clearly. As a property owner with no formal rental agreement in place, I had the right to demand market rent or end the tenancy. They had 30 days. I watched through my window on day 27 as Thomas loaded boxes into a rented van. He worked in silence, efficient and hollow. Renata carried lighter things in armloads, her face set into something I couldn't entirely read. Anger. Maybe. The specific bitterness of someone who had miscalculated badly. Neighbors across the street watched from their driveways. There was nothing to do about that. Thomas paused at the front door before he left. He looked older than 41. He looked like someone who understood exactly where he was standing in his own story. Dad, I never wanted it to go this far. I thought about what that sentence meant. I decided it probably meant several things simultaneously. I didn't answer it. Sergeant Delorme called me 2 weeks after they left. He had reviewed everything Patricia had sent. He wanted to meet at the detachment with his lead investigator. I brought Patricia. We sat in a plain room with a government-issue table and 2 RCMP investigators who had done their own work in the interim. The lead investigator was a woman named Constable Freitas. She was 37, methodical, and she'd already pulled pharmacy records. The Zopiclone prescription, she said. It was filled 3 weeks before the incident. It was in Renata Harrington's name. Her own prescription, legally obtained, and then used in concentrations well above what was prescribed. She laid photographs on the table. A printed receipt from the pharmacy. A photo of the prescription bottle found during a consensual search of the motel where Thomas and Renata had been staying since leaving my house. She looked at me steadily. Combined with the search history and the medical evidence, we have enough to apply for warrants. The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning. I was home when Patricia called. Mr. Harrington. Thomas Harrington and Renata Harrington were arrested this morning at their motel on Highway 97. They're being held at the RCMP detachment pending a bail hearing. Charges are administered noxious substance under Section 245 of the Criminal Code and conspiracy. I thanked her and set the phone down and sat in the quiet of the kitchen for a very long time. The bail hearing the following morning was not something I attended, but Patricia was there. She called afterward. Renata was denied bail. The judge cited flight risk and the deliberate nature of the offense. Thomas received bail conditions. No contact with me. Must surrender his passport. Must remain in BC. The trial was 4 months later in Kelowna. I dressed carefully that morning. Gray suit, the one Margaret had helped me choose for Thomas's wedding. I arrived at the courthouse early enough to sit in the gallery and collect myself before anything began. The Crown prosecutor was a careful, methodical man named Francis Tran, who had prosecuted elder abuse cases for 11 years. He told the jury the case was simple in its facts, if not in its human complexity. A 63-year-old man, widowed, had opened his home to his son and daughter-in-law during a period of financial difficulty. They had responded by attempting to end his life for financial gain. The evidence, he said, would be straightforward and devastating. Dr. Arsenault testified about the toxicology. The combination and concentration were not consistent with accidental ingestion. The word he used was intentional. He said it twice. The pharmacy records were entered into evidence. Renata's prescription. The dates. Constable Freitas walked the jury through the search history. 8 searches in the 7 days before the incident. The jury had printed copies. Several of them read slowly, stopping at specific lines. Raymond testified about the financial background. He was precise and unemotional, and the numbers landed the way numbers do when they explain everything. Patricia had advised me on my testimony. Clear, factual, no performance. Let the details carry what they carry. I took the stand in the afternoon. The Crown walked me through it in sequence. The argument about the folder, Thomas's apology the next morning, Renata appearing with the tea, the taste, the kitchen floor, the phone call. I answered each question in a single direction, without elaboration. Renata's defense tried sympathy and financial desperation. She had never intended serious harm. The doses were miscalculated. She had panicked afterward, and had never meant for it to go this far. Francis Tran's cross-examination was brief and effective. Miss Harrington, in your internet searches, you specifically looked up respiratory risks for elderly patients. Was that part of the miscalculation? Renata looked at her lawyer. Thomas's defense tried to create distance from the act itself. He knew about the debt. He knew about the tea. He had been in the kitchen that morning before Renata brought it to me. What he knew, and when he knew it, was not a question his lawyer could answer cleanly. I did not look at my son during his testimony. I looked at the window on the far wall instead. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. We waited in a small room down the hall. Patricia sat with me and we didn't talk very much. A court officer came to the door at 5:20 in the afternoon. The foreman was a retired schoolteacher from West Kelowna, 62 years old, with a steady voice. On the count of administering a noxious substance with intent to endanger life. Renata Harrington, guilty. Thomas Harrington, guilty as a party to the offense. I heard the sounds in the courtroom, but processed them distantly, the way you hear weather when you're inside. Sentencing was 3 weeks later. Judge Okafor was deliberate and unsentimental in her review of the case. I was invited to speak before she delivered her decision. I walked to the microphone without notes. Your Honor, I spent 34 years building something from nothing. My wife and I did it together. And then she died. And I continued because that is what you do. My son was the person I expected would carry something of that forward. Instead, he sat in my house and waited for me to die faster than nature intended. I am not here for sympathy. I am here because the law requires a proportional response to what was attempted. And I trust this court to provide it. I returned to my seat. Thomas looked at me once from the defense table. I did not look away. Renata received 7 years, eligible for parole after half. Thomas received 4 years, with credit for time served in pretrial custody, and 3 years of supervised probation to follow. The judge cited the distinction between the one who obtained and administered the substance and the one who permitted it to happen. Outside the courthouse, Patricia stood beside me on the steps in the October wind off the lake. How are you feeling? I considered the question honestly. Like I can start making decisions again. The house sold in November. The Kelowna market was slower than the previous 2 years, but the lakeshore property moved within 5 weeks of listing. The buyers were a couple from Calgary, late 40s, planning to move their family. I hoped they would be happy in it. I hoped the kitchen would become a different kind of room for them. I had already found a condo in downtown Kelowna, 11th floor, 1,200 square feet. A view of the lake in the mornings that reminded me of the mornings Margaret and I had taken coffee on the back deck, which was a kind of reminder I could live with. The day the sale closed, I sat with Gerald and arranged the donation. A substantial portion of the proceeds went to the BC Centre for Elder Advocacy and Support. I asked that a specific fund be created for seniors facing legal costs in estate disputes and abuse situations, people who had survived something similar and needed resources to fight back. Gerald looked at me over his glasses and said it was a good use of the money. I told him it was the best use I could imagine. 3 months after the sentencing, a letter arrived from the Alouette Correctional Center, Renata's facility. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope, precise and controlled even now. I set it on the table and made coffee before I opened it. She wrote 3 pages. She wrote about the cell and the routine, and the particular silence of a place where no one wants to be. She wrote about the night she had made the tea and what she had told herself about it, the logic she had used, the way desperation can build a structure around something monstrous until it looks almost reasonable from inside. She wrote that she understood now what she had taken from me beyond the nearly taken life, the trust, the version of my son I had believed in. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She said she wasn't certain she deserved to ask. She said she needed me to know. She understood. I read it twice. I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of my desk in the new condo. I did not answer it. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I hadn't yet decided what the truth was. Whether remorse expressed from inside a consequence she could not escape was the same as remorse freely offered. Whether it mattered either way. Thomas had written 2 weeks earlier. His letter was shorter and harder to read, not because of what it said, but because I recognized him in it. The boy he had been before whatever had happened to him happened. He wrote that he had started talking to someone at the facility, a counselor. He wrote that understanding what he had permitted was different from understanding what had been done, and that he was learning the difference. He wrote that he did not expect me to respond. I sat by the window with both letters on the table and watched the light move on the lake for a long time. I wrote Thomas one paragraph. I told him I was glad he was talking to someone. I told him I couldn't offer more than that right now, and that right now was the only honest unit of time I had available. I told him that what came after right now would depend on things neither of us could predict. I sealed it and put it in the mail before I could second guess it. That evening I made dinner in my own kitchen, in my own condo, with my own key, in my own lock, and I ate at the table and watched the news and went to bed without checking the security feed, because there was no security feed to check, because the people who had required it were no longer here. I thought about Margaret before I fell asleep, about what she would have said about all of it. I thought she would have said that surviving was not the same as living, and that the work now was to close the distance between the two. In the morning I made coffee, just coffee, in my own cup, made by my own hands. It tasted exactly right. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you'd like to hear the next story, click the box on the right.